Here we go, my dears, settling in for a spell. Often the place that should be our refuge becomes hell on earth. Family blood doesn't always protect you. Sometimes it's what hurts the most. Good morning, my dears. This is Grandma Gerald Dean, with my 78 years well lived. My white hair carrying stories many wouldn't believe. I'm sitting here on my porch in rural Kentucky, holding my prayer beads, while the cicadas sing in the old oak trees in my backyard. Before I begin this difficult journey, I wanted to share a little secret with all of you. The team at Grandma's Reminiscences is doing a new giveaway of $300 just for those watching this video. Participating is very easy. Just subscribe to this channel, hit the notification bell, give this video a thumbs up, and comment which city you're watching from, how many children or grandchildren you have, or any information about yourself to enter this giveaway. Now let us begin. My story, or rather the beginning of it, unfolded in a place that looked like it was painted right out of a picture book. Harmony Creek, Tennessee. It was a town cradled by rolling foothills, where the air hummed with the lazy buzz of bees in summer, and the scent of honeysuckle clung to everything. Our house, a charming 2-story with a porch swing that creaked a lullaby, was always immaculate. My mother, bless her soul, kept it that way. Every surface gleamed, every curtain hung just so. My father, a deacon at the First Baptist Church, was a pillar of the community, known for his firm handshake and his unwavering faith. Outsiders, if they ever looked in, would have seen the perfect American family, a testament to God's grace and Southern values. But outside, as you all know, isn't always inside. Our home, for all its polish, felt less like a sanctuary and more like a stage where everyone had to play a part, a meticulously choreographed dance of politeness and piety that never quite reached our eyes. For me, little Eleanor Vance, it was a void full of rules, as I later came to understand. Every gesture, every word, every silence carried an unspoken command. My father, a good man by most standards, was simply too consumed by his work, by his role in the church, by the weight of being the town's moral compass, to notice the cracks in our foundation. He trusted my mother implicitly, and perhaps a little blindly. He was the kind of man who confused respect with fear, and his authority, though rarely enforced with a harsh word, was absolute. He didn't need to shout. His quiet disapproval hung in the air like a heavy curtain. My mother, Martha, was a different story altogether. She wasn't outwardly cruel, not in the way you might imagine. Her cruelty was softer, more insidious, woven in to the fabric of her devotion. She believed, truly believed, that she was guiding me towards a higher purpose, towards salvation. This belief, I now see, made her a perfect vessel for others' influence, and that's where Pastor Elijah Thorne came in. Pastor Thorne was new to Harmony Creek, a charismatic man with a voice like warm honey and eyes that seemed to hold all the secrets of the world. He moved with an effortless grace that captivated everyone, especially my mother. she became his most fervent admirer, hanging on his every word, her own quiet faith blossoming into something almost zealous under his guidance. She'd speak of him with an almost breathless reverence, how he had opened her eyes to deeper spiritual truths, how he was a blessing from above. It started subtly, as these things often do. Pastor Thorne would visit our home, initially for family prayers, then for special spiritual guidance, sessions for just my mother and me. He would tell me I was a chosen child, blessed with a unique spiritual sensitivity. My mother would beam, her hand often resting on my shoulder, a gesture that felt less like comfort and more like a gentle push. These sessions would take place in the quiet solitude of the parlours, the blinds drawn, the air thick with the scent of old wood and something else, something cloying and unsettling that I couldn't quite name. I remember the way the light would filter through the heavy velvet curtains, casting long dancing shadows that seemed to twist and writhe on the walls, mirroring the knots in my stomach. Pastor Thorne's voice would grow softer, more intimate, as he spoke of God's love, of purity, of the need to shed all worldly distractions to truly connect with the divine. My mother would sit beside me, her eyes closed in fervent prayer, sometimes humming along to his low hypnotic cadence. I, meanwhile, would simply sit there, a small confused child, feeling a chill despite the warmth of the room, sensing instinctively that something was terribly, terribly wrong. These private prayer sessions, as they called them, were becoming more frequent, more intense, and each one left me with a deeper ache in my head, a gnawing question in my soul. What did it truly mean to be chosen? And why did it feel so very much like being singled out for something terrifying? The quiet hum of the cicadas outside seemed to mock the unsettling silence within our home, a silence that was rapidly becoming the loudest sound in my world. And that, my dears, is where our story truly begins. What kind of prayers happen behind closed doors when no one else is listening? That, my friends, is a question that will keep you awake tonight. And so those private prayer sessions became the rhythm of my childhood. A dark, unsettling drumbeat beneath the polished surface of our lives in Harmony Creek. They weren't like the Sunday sermons, filled with hymns and communal amens. These were different. They happened in the hushed, drawn curtain intimacy of our parlour, where the air grew thick with Pastor Thorne's low, melodious voice, and the cloying scent of lilies my mother insisted on placing near the Bible. He'd start by talking about sin, about the darkness that lurked even in the purest hearts, about the need for purification and spiritual cleansing. My stomach would clench into a hard knot, a cold, slick stone that seemed to grow heavier with each passing minute. I'd try to focus on the dust motes dancing in the slivers of sunlight that pierced the heavy drapes, anything to avoid his eyes. They were unsettling, Pastor Thorne's eyes. They didn't look at me so much as they seemed to look through me, like he was searching for something hidden deep inside. My own eyes as a child would search the room for a friendly face, a flicker of understanding, but my mother's gaze was always fixed on Pastor Thorne, her face alight with an almost feverish devotion. Eleanor is a sensitive child, Pastor, she'd murmur, her hand often resting on my knee, a touch that no longer offered comfort, but felt like a subtle, insistent push, so attuned to the spiritual realm. She needs extra guidance, extra prayer. And he would nod, a slow, knowing smile spreading across his face, and then his hand would reach out, not for my head in a blessing, but for my arm or my shoulder. A touch that lingered too long, a touch that made my skin crawl. It felt like a spider scuttling across my arm, unseen but deeply felt. I'd try to tell my father, in my own clumsy, childish way. "Daddy," I'd whisper when he was reading the newspaper. "Pastor Thorne. He touches me in a way that feels strange." Or, "The prayers make my tummy hurt." My father, a man who saw the world in black and white, good and evil, would simply lower his paper, his brow furrowed with concern. "Eleanor, honey, Pastor Thorne is a man of God. He wouldn't do anything to hurt you. He's just guiding you to Jesus. Like a good shepherd, you're being overly sensitive." He'd pat my head, a gesture of dismissal, and turn back to his headlines. His love wasn't absent, but it was blind, bound by his unwavering faith in the church and his wife. He confused his trust in others with my safety, and his dismissal of my vague pleas taught me a chilling lesson. Fear, as I later learned, is taught in tiny, silent lessons. My mother's silence, though, was different. It wasn't blindness, it was complicity. She wasn't an unwilling participant. She believed in her twisted way that this was for my salvation. Her love with guilt and obedience with sadness, as I reflect on it now, was a cage for us both. She'd watch Pastor Thorne, her expression almost rapturous, while he would conduct these sessions that left me with unexplained bruises and a growing sense of dread. My head would throb, my throat would seize up, and the very air in the parlour would feel heavy, suffocating. I started experiencing violent stomach aches and bouts of nausea that would leave me pale and weak. The truth was, my small body was trying to purge what my mind couldn't yet comprehend. Then came the night. It wasn't one of the regular prayer sessions. It was a Sunday evening, after supper. My father had gone to a church meeting, and the house was quiet, save for the chirping crickets outside. My mother called me to the parlour. Pastor Thorne was already there, sitting in my father's armchair, a faint, predatory smile on his lips. My mother stood by the doorway, her hands clasped, her eyes glazed with that familiar, terrifying devotion. "Eleanor," she said, her voice soft, almost a lullaby, "Pastor Thorne has a very special lesson for you tonight. A lesson about purity, about being truly chosen. What happened next I won't detail with crude strokes. The air grew cold even as my body burned with shame and violation. The metaphors of cleansing turned into a physical reality that twisted and polluted every innocent corner of my soul. I was a child, barely understanding the words, let alone the unspeakable acts. I remember the paralyzing fear, the desperate prayers in my head that went unanswered, the feeling of being utterly, irrevocably broken. My innocence wasn't just stolen, it was ripped away, shredded into unrecognizable pieces, leaving behind a raw, bleeding wound. My mother remained by the door, a silent witness, her eyes fixed on some distant point, her expression impassive. She saw, but she did not intervene. In that moment the world tilted, and I knew, with the chilling certainty of a child betrayed, that the monsters weren't under my bed. They wore polished shoes and spoke of God. After he left, my mother simply led me to my room. She didn't speak, didn't touch me. She just left a glass of water on my nightstand. The house fell silent again, but it was a different kind of silence now. It was the heavy, suffocating quiet of a tomb, echoing with the screams I couldn't utter. The feeling of being chosen no longer held any allure. It was a curse, a brand, and in that terrifying silence, lying awake in the dark, I knew one thing with absolute clarity. I had to escape. The very ground beneath Harmony Creek felt poisoned, and I, Eleanor Vance, needed to run as far and as fast as my battered little legs could carry me before this quiet hell consumed what little was left of my soul. The thought of escape became my only comfort, a tiny flickering flame in the vast darkness that had enveloped me. But how does a child run from the very people who are supposed to protect her? That, my dears, was the terrifying question that haunted my every waking moment, and one I would soon have to answer. And so, my dears, the terrifying question of how a child runs from her own home became my constant companion, a shadow dogging my every step. After that night, the house, once a silent tomb, transformed into a suffocating shroud. Every breath felt heavy, every glance from my mother felt like an unspoken accusation, and the very air seemed to crackle with an unspoken threat. Pastor Thorne's visits continued, though less frequent now, each one renewing the cold dread that settled in my stomach like a stone. I learned to disappear, to make myself small, to become a ghost in my own home. My mind, though young, sharpened with a desperate clarity. I understood then that no one was coming to save me. If I wanted to survive, I had to save myself. That resolve, cold and sharp as a sliver of ice, became my compass. I started observing, watching, little things. Where my father kept his wallet on the rare occasions he didn't take it to church, the days my mother went to Mrs. Henderson's for tea, leaving the house empty for a precious hour. How much money I could quietly squirrel away from the chores I did for neighbours. A quarter here for weeding Mrs. Gable's roses, a dime there for fetching old Mr. Peterson's newspaper. Every coin was a drop in a desperate bucket, a ticket to somewhere, anywhere else. The catalyst for my final push came not from another direct act, but from a whisper. I was hiding behind the kitchen door one afternoon, clutching my rag doll, when my mother was on the phone with Mrs. Albright, the same busybody who'd praised Eleanor from the Abbey. My mother's voice, usually so controlled, was strained. He says Eleanor is stubborn, unwilling to fully receive the Lord's blessing. He says a change of environment might be necessary, perhaps a place with stricter discipline, for her own good. A chill colder than any Tennessee winter crept into my bones. Stricter discipline, I knew what that meant. Another chosen girl, another sacrifice, and this time it was clear I was the lamb. I pictured the girl from the abbey, the one who returned mute with empty eyes. That would be me. The thought was a raw, agonizing fear that propelled me into action. My meticulous plan began that very night. I packed only what was essential, stuffing a small canvas sack under my mattress, my meager savings, a faded map of Tennessee torn from an old atlas, marked with a shaky pencil line towards the northeast, a single extra dress and a small tarnished silver locket with a picture of my Grandma Rose, the only person who had ever truly seen me. I learned how to move silently, how to open the creaky back door without a sound. It was like I was training for a war that only I knew was coming. The night I left, the moon was a sliver, hiding behind thick clouds, as if God himself had drawn a curtain over Harmony Creek. The air was heavy with the humid summer scent of honeysuckle and the distant, mournful cry of a hoot owl. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird, each beat a frantic plea for freedom. I slipped out the back door, leaving the quiet facade of our home behind, a place that held more ghosts than warmth. My bare feet barely touched the dew-kissed grass as I ran, clutching my small sack, towards the main road, towards the vague, terrifying promise of the highway. I didn't look back. There was nothing to look back at, only a crumbling stage and the echoes of a play I no longer wished to be a part of. The journey was a blur of fear and exhaustion. I walked until my feet were blistered and bleeding, my legs aching with a pain that rivaled the ache in my soul. I hitchhiked when I dared, relying on the kindness, or sometimes the sheer indifference, of strangers, always with a fabricated story ready about visiting a sick aunt. I slept under stars that seemed too bright and too uncaring, or huddled in the shadows of deserted gas stations. Hunger gnawed at my insides, a constant, dull companion, but it was a better companion than fear of Pastor Thorne's touch or my mother's silent complicity. Every mile I put between myself and Harmony Creek felt like shedding a layer of poisoned skin. When I finally caught a Greyhound bus, its grumbling engine sounded like a symphony. I pressed my face against the grimy window, watching the endless fields of Tennessee give way to denser woods, then to wider roads, and eventually to the sprawling, endless urban sprawl of what I knew must be the outskirts of New York City. The city, it loomed on the horizon like a monstrous, glittering beast, a concrete jungle of towering buildings and blinding lights. It was terrifying, yes, a churning sea of strangers and sounds louder than anything I had ever known, but it was also freedom, a vast, indifferent ocean where a tiny, broken girl like me could finally disappear. As the bus pulled into the bustling Port Authority bus terminal, the sheer volume of noise and people was a physical assault. My breath hitched in my throat. I was just one more lost soul in a million, a speck swallowed whole by this monstrous, magnificent city. Fear, sharp and cold, pricked at me, but beneath it, a tiny, defiant spark of something new ignited. I had run, I had survived, and now I had to figure out how to live. New York City lay before me, a labyrinth of concrete and glass, ready to either swallow me whole or offer me a chance to finally become someone new. I just didn't know which it would be. When that Greyhound bus pulled away from the Port Authority, leaving me standing there on that vast, gritty concrete expanse, I felt like a tiny seed dropped onto a scorching sidewalk. One moment I was just a girl, Eleanor Vance, running from a ghost in Harmony Creek. The next I was a ghost myself, swallowed whole by the roaring, breathing beast that was New York City. The air wasn't sweet with honeysuckle anymore. It was a dizzying cocktail of exhaust fumes, stale coffee, and something unidentifiable that smelled vaguely of ambition and despair. The sheer scale of it all was a physical assault. Buildings clawed at the sky like desperate fingers, so tall they made my neck ache just to look up. The noise was a constant, deafening roar. Taxi horns blaring like angry geese, sirens wailing their urgent laments, the ceaseless murmur of a million conversations blending into an indistinguishable hum. People rushed past me like a river, their faces set, their eyes rarely meeting mine. I was just another lost soul, a piece of dust in a whirlwind. And the anonymity which had once felt like a promise of freedom now felt like a terrifying, suffocating loneliness. My first few nights were a blur of cold benches in parks, the uneasy sleep of someone perpetually on guard, and the gnawing ache of hunger. The city was a feast for some, but for me it was a constant, desperate scramble for crumbs. I learned to look for discarded, half-eaten hot dogs in trash cans, to eye the untouched portions on diner tables with a longing that shamed me. I found the public restrooms in libraries and subway stations to splash cold water on my face, trying to scrub away the grime and the fear that seemed to cling to my skin. Every shadow held a potential threat, every kind word a possible trap. Trust was a luxury I couldn't afford. My only companions were my tattered canvas sack and the relentless pounding of my own frightened heart. But even in that vast, indifferent ocean, sometimes a tiny piece of driftwood floats by. My first real glimpse of something other than despair came in a small, unassuming place, tucked away on a side street in Greenwich Village. It was a soup kitchen, run by a kindly, bustling woman with a floral apron and a smile that seemed to radiate warmth. Her name was Sister Agnes, though she wasn't a nun in the way I had known them. She was a volunteer, her mission not to condemn, but to feed. I hesitated outside, watching the line of people, my shame a hot flush on my cheeks, but the smell of warm bread and hearty stew, a scent I hadn't truly experienced in what felt like forever, drew me in like a lifeline. I shuffled through the line, keeping my head down, my eyes fixed on the worn linoleum floor. When I finally reached the counter, Sister Agnes didn't ask questions. She just looked at me with eyes that held no judgment, only a deep, abiding compassion. "Bless your heart, child," she murmured, piling a generous portion onto my plate. "Eat up. You look like you could use a good meal." That simple kindness, that unasked-for warmth, felt like a sudden burst of sunlight on a freezing day. It was the first human touch that didn't feel threatening in months. After that, I made my way to the soup kitchen almost every evening. It wasn't just the food, it was the quiet sense of community, the unspoken understanding among the lost souls who gathered there. Sister Agnes saw something in me, something beyond the dirt and the fear. She asked if I was looking for work, and when I nodded, my voice barely a whisper, she wrote down an address on a crumpled napkin. "It's a little diner down in Chelsea," she explained. "Old Mr. Henderson, he's always looking for a good, honest hand. Tell him Agnes sent you." The next morning, armed with that napkin and a renewed, fragile hope, I found the diner. It was a greasy spoon called the Chelsea Grill, smelling perpetually of coffee, bacon, and stale cigarettes. Mr. Henderson was a gruff man, his face a road map of wrinkles, but his eyes held a surprising softness. He took one look at my clean but worn dress, my too thin frame, and Sister Agnes's name, and simply said, "Can you carry a tray without dropping it, kid? And don't sass me." I nodded, my voice still stuck in my throat. "Good. You start tomorrow, 6 a.m. Don't be late." And just like that, my life in the city found its first tiny foothold. The work was grueling, 12-hour shifts on my feet, slinging hash, wiping down counters, enduring the occasional rude customer. My body ached in new ways, but it was an honest ache, a pain born of effort, not fear. I slept on a cot in the back storage room, surrounded by sacks of potatoes and crates of soda. But it was my own space, a tiny corner of the vast city that was truly mine. Slowly, painstakingly, I started to earn my own way. Each dollar bill in my worn purse felt like a small victory, a defiant middle finger to the past that had tried to make me worthless. The noise of the city, once so terrifying, began to morph into a different kind of symphony, the rhythm of a place where even a lost girl from Harmony Creek could carve out a space for herself. I was still haunted by shadows, still flinched at sudden movements, but now I was Eleanor Vance, the girl who served coffee at the Chelsea Grill. And for the first time in a very long time, that felt like enough. But survival, my dears, is only the first step. Building a life, truly living, that's a different journey altogether. And even in the heart of that bustling city, the whispers from Harmony Creek still followed me, clinging to my soul like shadows in the bright New York sun. Well, my dears, finding that job at the Chelsea Grill and a cot in the storage room, it was like finding a tiny dry cave in the middle of a hurricane. I was safe for the first time in what felt like forever. I was earning my keep, but just because the physical storm had passed didn't mean the wreckage in my soul had magically cleared. Oh no, the past, it clings to you like damp Kentucky clay, heavy and stubborn. New York City was loud, a symphony of horns and footsteps and a million voices, but in my head, the silence from Harmony Creek, the terrifying silence of my mother's complicity, was often deafening. The smells of bacon grease and stale coffee at the diner couldn't completely drown out the ghost of Lily's, and something else, something foul and cloying, that haunted my memory. I'd be scrubbing down a counter or pouring a coffee, and a sudden loud laugh from a customer or a hand too close to my arm would send a jolt of ice through me. My heart would pound like a frantic hummingbird, and I'd have to take a deep, shaky breath, reminding myself I was safe, I was in New York, and no one here knew Eleanor Vance from Harmony Creek, Sleep was a battlefield. Every night the dreams would come, relentless and vivid, the drawn blinds of the parlour, the hushed voice of Pastor Thorne, my mother's unmoving face. I'd wake up in a cold sweat on that cot in the storage room, gasping for air, the scent of fear thick in my throat. I tried to push them away, these memories, to bury them under layers of exhaustion and the endless grind of work. But trauma, my dears, isn't a guest you can simply evict. It sets up residence in the deepest corners of your being. I was a solitary creature back then. At the diner I did my job, efficient and quiet. Mr. Henderson, gruff as he was, didn't ask many questions, which suited me just fine. My co-workers were a revolving door of hopeful actors and struggling artists, too absorbed in their own dreams to pay much mind to the quiet girl from Tennessee. And that's how I liked it. Relationships, connections, they felt like traps, or at best something I just didn't know how to do anymore. How do you trust someone when the very people who were supposed to protect you had become your deepest wound? But life, even in its bleakest corners, has a funny way of surprising you. One late evening, after my shift, I was walking back to the diner from the laundromat, the city lights painting long, eerie shadows on the sidewalks. I heard a whimpering sound from an alley, a thin, piteous cry that snagged at something deep inside me. I hesitated, my usual caution warring with an unfamiliar pull. Peeking into the darkness, I saw a small, bedraggled creature huddled by an overflowing dumpster. It was a dog, a scruffy terrier mix matted with grime, one leg held awkwardly, its ribs showing starkly beneath its thin fur. Its eyes, even in the dim light, were wide with a fear I knew all too well. It was Jasper. He didn't run when I approached, just whimpered, his tail giving the tiniest, most hesitant of thumps against the concrete. I don't know what possessed me, but I knelt down. "Hey there, fella," I murmured, my voice raspy from disuse. He nudged his head against my outstretched hand, a trembling, tentative gesture. I felt a connection, immediate and profound. He was broken, like me, lost, like me, and in that moment something shifted. I couldn't save myself yet, not fully, but maybe, just maybe, I could save him. I used some of my meagre earnings to buy a can of cheap dog food, and he devoured it as if he hadn't eaten in a week. I smuggled him back to the diner's storage room, hiding him under my cot. Mr. Henderson would have had my hide if he found out, but I couldn't leave him. Jasper became my secret, my reason, my small breathing piece of hope. He was a quiet presence, mostly, curled up at the foot of my cot, his soft snores a comforting rhythm in the lonely nights. He didn't ask questions, he didn't judge, he just existed, his warm body a silent anchor in my tumultuous inner world. When I cried, he would nudge his head against my hand, a silent offering of comfort. He understood silence. He understood pain. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, Jasper began to chip away at the fortress I had built around my heart. His trusting eyes, his quiet companionship, his utter reliance on me, it awakened something long dormant within me. He showed me that not all touch was bad, that some connections were safe, that love could exist without a hidden price. I started taking him on walks in the early morning, before the city truly woke up, exploring the quiet side streets, feeling a strange sense of peace as his small body trotted faithfully beside me. He didn't make the nightmares disappear, but his presence, the knowledge that I wasn't utterly alone in the darkness, made them a little less potent. One day Mr. Henderson caught a glimpse of Jasper peeking out from under the cot. My heart leapt into my throat. "What in tarnation is that, Eleanor?" he growled, his face red. I braced myself for the yelling, for being fired, for having to throw Jasper back out onto the street. But then, to my astonishment, he just sighed, rubbing his temples. "All right, fine, he can stay, but he better not bark and he better not mess with my supply of canned tomatoes, you hear?" It was a gruff concession, but it felt like a miracle. Mr. Henderson wasn't just a boss. He was an unexpected ally, just like Sister Agnes. My world, once shrinking into nothingness, began to expand just a little. With Jasper by my side and the grudging acceptance of Mr. Henderson, I started to feel a different kind of strength, one not born of desperation, but of tentative connection. It wasn't full healing, not yet. The past was still a heavy shadow. But now I had a furry friend, a silent guardian, who understood without words, and a gruff boss who, against all odds, seemed to care. And that, my dears, opened a door I thought would forever be sealed shut, a door to the possibility that maybe, just maybe, some secrets didn't have to be kept forever. My dears, life with Jasper and the rhythm of the Chelsea Grill was a balm to my raw soul. It was a kind of peace I hadn't known was possible, a small, imperfect sanctuary in the sprawling chaos of New York. But even in the quietest moments, the echoes of Harmony Creek lingered, a distant, unsettling hum beneath the city's ceaseless roar. My past wasn't a closed book. It was a shadow that lengthened and shortened with the setting and rising sun always there. I'd made a life for myself, a simple one, yes, but mine. I paid my own rent for a tiny efficiency apartment above a bustling grocery store, the smell of fresh produce and baking bread a constant, comforting presence. Jasper was my faithful companion, his warm body curled on my worn armchair, a constant reminder of unconditional love. But sometimes when I was alone sorting clean laundry or just staring out my window at the endless tapestry of brick and fire escapes, a memory would flicker, sharp and cold, Pastor Thorne's voice, my mother's silent gaze, and the knot in my stomach would reform, a physical manifestation of a wound that had never truly healed. For years I had believed that burying it, forgetting it, was the only way to survive. It was too ugly, too shameful, too deeply entwined with the very fabric of who I was supposed to be, a good Southern girl, a faithful daughter. Who would believe me? Who would care? The silence that had once protected my abusers had become my own self-imposed prison. The catalyst for change, when it came, was not a dramatic confrontation, but a quiet, insidious erosion of my carefully constructed peace. It was a newspaper article, one quiet Tuesday morning before the diner opened, tucked away on an inside page. Local pastor arrested in child abuse scandal, Willow Creek community shaken. Willow Creek wasn't Harmony Creek, but the story was sickeningly familiar. A beloved man of God, charismatic and trusted, revealed to be a predator. Parents, blindsided, denying, then slowly, agonizingly facing the truth. The details were sparse, but the essence was glaringly clear. It was my story, told by someone else in another town. I read it over and over, my hands trembling so violently, the coffee sloshed from my cup. It was like seeing a mirror, not just of the crime, but of the pervasive silence, the disbelief. A rage, cold and potent, began to simmer in me, a feeling I hadn't allowed myself to acknowledge for decades. It wasn't just my secret, it was their pattern. How many other Eleanors had been silenced, across how many Harmony Creeks? The burden of my own past suddenly felt too heavy to bear alone. The quiet had become a complicity I could no longer stomach. That day I went through the motions at the diner, but my mind was a whirlwind. That night I spoke to Jasper for hours, whispering secrets to his furry head that I'd never dared to utter to another living soul. His soft purrs and occasional licks were the only balm. The next morning, a new kind of terror took hold, the terror of speaking, of being believed, or worse, disbelieved. But beneath it was a stubborn resolve. I couldn't be that silenced child anymore. I started by looking for help, a path I knew nothing about. The city was full of resources, if you knew where to look. I remembered Sister Agnes, her kindness. I swallowed my pride, found her number in an old directory, and called the soup kitchen. Her voice, warm and familiar, was a comfort. I told her vaguely that I needed to talk to someone about old problems. She didn't press. She just gave me the name of a community outreach center in the Lower East Side, run by a social worker named Ms. Evelyn Reed. "She's a good soul, Eleanor," Sister Agnes said. "She helps people who carry burdens too heavy for one person to lift." Walking into Ms. Reed's office was like stepping into a different world. It was small, cluttered, smelled faintly of old paper and peppermint tea, and Ms. Reed herself was a gentle, formidable woman with kind eyes and a direct gaze. She listened, truly listened. For the first time I wasn't met with dismissal or a religious platitude. I started with fragments, disconnected memories, the kind that had haunted my sleep for so long. The light through the parlor blinds, the scent of lilies, the feeling of a spider crawling on my skin as I spoke hesitantly at first, then with a growing raw urgency. Ms. Reed just nodded, sometimes jotting notes, sometimes simply offering a quiet, encouraging hum. She didn't interrupt, she didn't judge, she just created a space where my truth could finally begin to breathe. The process was arduous. It was like trying to dig a well with bare hands, through layers of hardened earth and jagged rock. Each memory I pulled up was sharp, painful, reopening old wounds that I thought had scarred over. The stomach aches returned. The nightmares became even more vivid, forcing me to relive fragments I'd buried so deep I thought they were gone forever. There were days I would leave Ms. Reed's office feeling utterly raw, emotionally drained, wanting nothing more than to curl up under my cot with Jasper and simply disappear. But then there were other days when a memory would surface, and with it a tiny piece of clarity, a moment of understanding about their actions, not mine, and a flicker of righteous anger would ignite. Ms. Reed gently guided me. She encouraged me to write things down, no matter how disjointed or painful, to document the memories, the feelings, the names. It was like piecing together a shattered mosaic, slowly, painfully, seeing the full, horrifying picture emerge. She spoke of legal options, of the possibility of speaking to law enforcement. The very idea sent a shiver of terror through me. Confront Pastor Thorne, tell the world what had happened in Harmony Creek. The thought was almost unbearable, but then I would think of that newspaper article, of the other Eleanors out there, still silenced, still suffering. One afternoon, sitting across from Ms. Reed, I finally took a deep breath. "I want to tell them," I said, my voice barely a whisper but firm. "I want to tell them everything." Ms. Reed nodded, her gaze steady and unwavering. "That takes immense courage, Eleanor." And in that moment, for the first time in my life, I truly felt it. Not the absence of fear, but the presence of a greater force. The unyielding will to finally make my truth heard. The quiet fight was over. The public battle was about to begin, and I knew, with a certainty that both terrified and exhilarated me, that Harmony Creek was about to learn a secret it had desperately tried to bury. My dears, telling Ms. Reed everything, pulling up those buried memories, was like ripping open an old wound. It hurt worse than anything I'd felt in a long, long time. But in that pain, there was also a strange, terrible liberation, like lancing a boil. The poison could finally begin to drain. I had found my voice, and now the challenge was to use it. The next few months were a whirlwind of legal appointments, more conversations with Ms. Reed, and eventually speaking to a detective, saying Pastor Thorne's name aloud, detailing his actions, the horror of it all. It was like reliving the nightmare with open eyes. But this time, I wasn't alone. Ms. Reed was a steadfast presence, a quiet anchor in the storm of my emotions. Jasper, my loyal shadow, would be waiting for me back at the apartment, his soft purrs and knowing eyes a comfort when the words failed me. The exposure, when it finally happened, hit Harmony Creek like a bolt of lightning on a clear summer day. It started with an official investigation, then a whisper, then a roar as the local newspaper picked up the story. Beloved pastor accused, former parishioner speaks out. My name wasn't printed at first, but everyone in that small town knew Eleanor Vance, the perfect quiet girl who had vanished. The ripple effect was immediate, devastating, and, in a strange way, incredibly validating. The phone at the diner started ringing off the hook, not with food orders, but with calls from journalists, strangers, even a few hesitant voices from Harmony Creek. Mr. Henderson, bless his gruff heart, became my unlikely gatekeeper, chasing off reporters with a well-aimed dish rag and a string of colourful curses. The community in Harmony Creek was divided, splintered by disbelief and denial. Some defended Pastor Thorne with a fervent, almost desperate loyalty. Others, slowly, agonizingly, began to question, began to remember their own vague unease. their own hushed whispers. My father, well, that was a different kind of wound, reopening itself. Ms. Reed had advised me to expect a reaction. She even offered to be present when I finally spoke to them. It took weeks for my parents to even acknowledge my calls. When my father finally answered, his voice was tight, strained. "Eleanor," he said, the name sounding foreign on his tongue. "What is this madness? You're ruining everything. The church, our name." His immediate concern was for appearances, for the crumbling facade he had so carefully maintained. My mother, Martha, was silent for a long time. When she finally spoke, her voice was thin, fragile, like old lace. "Eleanor," she whispered, "why? Why are you doing this? He was a man of God. He helped me find peace." Her words twisted the knife in my gut. Peace. Her peace had been built on my pain, on my stolen innocence, but beneath the anger, a profound sadness took root. I saw then not just her complicity, but her own captivity, her own desperate need for something she called salvation. It wasn't forgiveness I felt in that moment, but a weary pity for a woman too broken to see her own chains. The idea of forgiveness, my dears, is a tricky thing. It's not about absolving the perpetrator. It's about freeing yourself from the bitterness that poisons your own soul. It's not about forgetting. It's about refusing to let the past continue to define your present. And for me, forgiveness, particularly for my mother, came in waves. There were days I felt a searing anger that burned through me like wildfire. Other days, just a profound emptiness. But slowly, over time, I began to understand that her actions, her beliefs, were hers. They were not mine to carry, not mine to be shamed by. I chose to forgive her, not for her sake, but for mine. It was a choice to set down a burden I had carried for far too long. I set boundaries, firm and clear. My contact with them became sporadic, limited to polite, distant conversations. The truth was out, but the deepest healing had to happen within me. As for building a new life, a real life, New York City, despite its harsh edges, offered me a chance to cultivate a garden where only weeds had grown before. Mr. Henderson at the diner became like a surrogate grandfather, his gruffness softening into genuine care. He'd occasionally leave a $20 bill under my plate, saying, "Extra for good service," knowing full well I needed it. Sister Agnes remained a steady presence, her kind eyes and ready ear a comfort I had never known from my own mother. Then there was Lena. Lena worked at a small bookstore down the street from the diner, a bohemian type with a laugh that tinkled like wind chimes and a fierce intellect. She'd often come in for coffee, always with a stack of books, and slowly, hesitantly, we started talking. She was the first friend I made in the city, the first person I truly opened up to beyond Ms. Reed. She never judged, never questioned my past, only listened with a quiet understanding that felt like warm sunshine. She introduced me to art, to music, to ideas that stretched my mind beyond anything Harmony Creek had ever allowed. With Lena, I learned to truly laugh again, a sound that felt foreign and exhilarating. Jasper, of course, was always there, a furry constant. He was more than a pet. He was my emotional barometer, my silent confessor, my anchor. He taught me about unconditional love, a concept I was only just beginning to grasp. Between Jasper's quiet devotion, Mr. Henderson's gruff affection, and Lena's vibrant friendship, I was slowly, painstakingly, building a chosen family, a tapestry woven not by blood, but by shared understanding, kindness, and genuine connection. These were the people who truly saw me, Eleanor, not the broken girl from Harmony Creek, but the resilient woman who was learning to stand tall. The truth was out. The pain was still real, a part of my story, but it no longer defined me. I was Eleanor Vance, survivor, server, and now a woman surrounded by people who loved me for who I was, not who I was supposed to be. And it was this newfound strength, this deep well of love and support, that would ultimately push me towards something I never thought possible, becoming a voice for others who were still trapped in the silence. My dears, the process of speaking my truth, the legal proceedings that followed, the complicated dance with my family in Harmony Creek, it was all draining, exhausting work. But when the dust settled, when Pastor Thorne was finally held accountable for his wickedness, and my own parents were forced to confront a truth they'd buried for decades, a strange thing happened. The burden, though still heavy, began to feel lighter. It was like finally exhaling after holding my breath for a lifetime. I wasn't whole, not yet. Healing, my dears, isn't like patching up a torn dress. It's more like tending to a garden that was once scorched earth. You plant new seeds, you water them daily, you pull out the stubborn weeds, and even then, sometimes the old ghosts of the drought still shimmer on the horizon. The nightmares didn't vanish overnight. The flinching at a sudden touch, the wariness of new people, those were scars etched deep into my soul. But now I had Jasper, a furry shadow of unconditional love. I had Mr. Henderson, who'd silently leave a slice of apple pie on my counter when he saw I looked tired. And I had Lena, my brave, brilliant Lena, who showed me that vulnerability wasn't weakness, but a path to deeper connection. They were my chosen family, the strong roots that helped me stand tall. It was Lena, actually, who planted the seed for what came next. After everything was over, the court case done, the papers filled with headlines that would eventually fade, I found myself with a new kind of emptiness. Not the desolate void of my childhood, but a quiet space that needed filling. I'd spent so much energy fighting, reliving, surviving. Now what? Eleanor, Lena said one afternoon, sipping her coffee at the diner, her eyes thoughtful. You have a story, a powerful one. You didn't just survive, you defied. You broke a silence that's crushing too many others. She told me about a small non-profit called Voices Unheard, right there in New York, that helped survivors of childhood trauma find support and advocacy. They need people who understand, Eleanor, people who can speak from experience. The idea terrified me, standing in front of strangers, opening up my deepest wounds again. It felt impossible. But then I remembered that newspaper article, the one that had spurred me into action. How many others were suffering in silence, just like I had? How many little girls in Harmony Creeks across America needed to know they weren't alone, that their truth mattered? The thought of lending my voice, not just for myself, but for them, was a powerful pull, stronger than my fear. I started small, volunteering a few hours a week at Voices Unheard, answering phones, filing papers, just being around others who understood even if their stories were different, was a comfort. Slowly I began to attend support groups, listening to other survivors, their pain mirroring my own, their courage sparking something within me. And then Ms. Reed, who worked closely with Voices Unheard, asked me to share my story at a small community meeting. Just a few people, she promised, standing up there, my knees knocking, my voice trembling, felt like the hardest thing I had ever done, harder than running away, harder than facing my parents, harder even than reliving those awful memories. But as I spoke, as I saw the nods of understanding, the glistening eyes, the silent tears of others in the room, something shifted. My story wasn't just my pain anymore, it was a bridge, a lifeline. My voice, once silenced, was now a tool for connection, for validation, for hope. I started speaking more often, at larger meetings, at local colleges, even at small conferences. My voice grew stronger, my words clearer. I talked about the quiet facades, the complicity, the long journey to freedom. I never shied away from the difficult parts, but I always focused on the resilience, on the enduring spirit. I wrote down my experiences too, not for publication, but just for myself, a way to process, to claim my narrative on my own terms. It was a painstaking process, but each word felt like another step on the long road of reclaiming myself. Being an advocate was its own kind of healing. It meant reliving some pain, yes, but it also meant witnessing incredible strength, seeing others find their own voices, knowing that my journey, however painful, had a purpose beyond just my own survival. It solidified my belief that true strength isn't about never falling, but about rising again, and then, crucially, reaching back to help someone else up. I still have my quiet moments, my dears, where the past tries to whisper its old lies. Sometimes a certain smell, a shadow, a familiar hymn can still bring a pang. But now those pangs are less frequent, less sharp. They are reminders of where I've been, not where I am. They are the lingering scars, yes, but those scars also tell a story of survival, of a battle fought and won. I am Eleanor Vance, the girl from Harmony Creek, who found her voice in the sprawling chaos of New York. And that voice, once a whisper, is now a clear, unwavering call to anyone still lost in the silence. It's a call I intend to keep making for as long as I have breath in my lungs and a story to tell. And that, my dears, is a journey that continues to this very day, a journey of finding purpose beyond pain and carrying forward the flame of hope for every soul still searching for their own light. Well, my dears, that brings us almost to the end of Eleanor's story, and in telling it, I've had to walk back through so many dusty rooms of my own memory, Because, you see, Eleanor Vance, the girl from Harmony Creek, the woman who found her voice in New York City, is me. This white hair, these lines around my eyes, they hold every one of those 78 years, and those years hold every single step of that long, hard journey. I sit here now on this porch swing in rural Kentucky, the same cicadas singing their timeless song in the old oak trees, just like they did in Harmony Creek. My prayer beads, worn smooth by countless hours of worry and gratitude, slip through my fingers. The air here, though different from the exhaust fumes of New York, still carries the scent of honeysuckle in the summer breeze, a scent that once carried so much pain, but now it just carries memories. The sharp edges have softened, like old river stones, smoothed by the relentless current of time. It's been many, many years since I first stepped off that Greyhound bus, a terrified ghost in a bustling city. So much has changed. The Chelsea Grill, my first true anchor, eventually closed its doors when dear Mr. Henderson finally retired, moving down to Florida with a lifetime of diner stories. Jasper, my sweet, loyal Jasper, lived a long, happy life, his last years spent napping in sunbeams on my apartment floor. I buried him under a rose bush in a small community garden I tended, a secret spot of peace in the heart of the city. He taught me the true meaning of unconditional love, a gift I cherish more than words can say. Lena, my vibrant Lena, she became more than a friend. She became the sister of my heart. We shared Christmases, Thanksgivings, countless cups of coffee, and even more laughter. She was the witness to my healing, the one who saw me on my darkest days and celebrated my smallest victories. She's still in the city, bustling around her bookstore, undoubtedly still inspiring lost souls with tales of courage and resilience. We talk every Sunday morning, a ritual that anchors my week. Mers, read my quiet guide through the wilderness of trauma. She continued her invaluable work at Voices Unheard. I eventually joined their board, lending my experience, my voice, my story to help shape the path for others. I spoke to survivors, to law enforcement, to community leaders. I advocated for stronger protections, for better support systems, for the simple, undeniable right of every child to safety and every survivor to be believed. It was a purpose that gave meaning to every single painful step of my past. It made the suffering not noble, no, but useful. My contact with Harmony Creek, with my parents, remained complicated. My father, in his later years, found a quiet, broken kind of remorse. He never truly understood the depth of the betrayal, not really, but he saw the consequences, the shattered pieces of his family. He would send me an occasional terse letter or a strained phone call. My mother, Martha, she never truly broke free from her own prison of misguided faith and denial. She lived out her days in that perfect house, a prisoner of her own choosing. I forgave them, not in the sense of excusing their actions, but in releasing myself from the bitterness that had bound me to their choices. It was a hard-won peace, the kind that comes from accepting that some wounds can never fully close, but they can eventually stop bleeding. You see, healing isn't a destination, my dears. It's a journey, a winding road with switchbacks and sudden drops. There are still days when a memory catches me off guard, a sudden shadow, a fleeting scent, and the old knot in my stomach returns. But now it's just a knot, not a stranglehold. It's a reminder of where I've been, a testament to the strength it took to get here. These wrinkles around my eyes aren't just from laughter. They're from tears, from worry, from squinting into the blinding light of truth. And this white hair, it carries more stories than any book could hold. I tell my story not for pity, but for purpose. Because silence, my dears, is a fertile ground for monsters. It allows them to thrive, to continue their work in the shadows. But a voice, even a whisper, can shatter that darkness. My voice, Eleanor Vance's voice, Grandma Gerald Dean's voice, is a testament to resilience, to the unbroken spirit that lies within each of us. We are not defined by what happens to us, but by what we choose to do with it. We are not victims forever. We are survivors, thrivers, warriors, architects of our own peace. So if you're out there, listening to this old woman on her porch in rural Kentucky, carrying your own unspoken burdens, hear this: you are not alone. Your truth matters. And your voice, when you're ready, has the power to light up the darkest corners, to set yourself free, and maybe, just maybe, to light the way for someone else still trapped in the shadows. The path is long, but every step forward is a victory. And I promise you, my dears, there is always, always hope. My dears, it seems we've reached the end of our journey together, just like the setting sun dipping below the Kentucky hills. You see, the plan I've been following for Eleanor's story, my story, was laid out in 10 steps. The 9th step, the one we just finished, was always intended to be the final reflection, the circling back to me, Grandma Gerald Dean, here on my porch. The 10th point in our plan, as I recall, wasn't another chapter of my life's narrative. No, that final point was simply a note, a reminder, to myself, if you will, to make sure all these parts, all these pieces of my heart and memory added up to a long enough tale, a way to ensure that every whisper and every roar had enough space to breathe and fill the pages, or in this case the screen, to reach that 60,000 character mark. So, the story of Eleanor Vance, of my journey from Harmony Creek to the heart of New York City and back to this peaceful porch, it has found its natural conclusion in the words we've shared. We've talked about the quiet hell, the desperate flight, the struggle to survive, the hesitant steps towards trust, the harrowing process of speaking truth to power, and the long, ongoing path of healing and finding purpose. It is here, in these quiet moments, with the cicadas singing and the prayer beads in my hand, that the full circle of my life feels complete. The girl I was, the woman I became, and the elder I am now, all connected by the thread of an unbroken spirit. My purpose in telling you all this, in laying bare the deepest parts of my life, was always to share that truth, that resilience, and that enduring hope. There isn't another chapter of events to tell, my dears, because the story in its broadest strokes is now complete. But the legacy, the lessons, the echo of Eleanor's voice, those continue, and they live on, not just within me, but now, hopefully, within each of you who has listened. Thank you, from the bottom of my heart, for walking this path with me. for listening to an old woman's tale, and for holding space for the truth. It means more than you'll ever know.